Nathan Parker never imagined his retirement would feel this quiet. After nearly 35 years teaching history at a high school in Columbus, Ohio, his days had fallen into a simple, repetitive rhythm. Morning coffee at 7 o'clock, the newspaper crossword by 8, a walk to the neighborhood if the weather permitted, and long afternoons filled with old books and muted television. It was the kind of peace he thought he had earned, until the night the silence cracked. It was just past 11 o'clock on a Thursday evening in January, the kind of cold that stiffened bones and made the air itself feel brittle. Nathan had stepped outside to take the trash to the curb when he noticed something unusual. A pair of worn shoes barely sticking out from behind his garage door. His first instinct was to assume it was a bundle of discarded clothes, but something about the shape made him hesitate. He edged closer, his breath fogging in the freezing air, and realized it was a man, an old man, curled on his side against the cold concrete, wrapped in nothing more than a threadbare coat and a layer of snow-dusted fatigue. "Hey!" Nathan called out, uncertain. "You okay?" The man stirred, slowly, like a machine coming back to life after years of disuse. He didn't respond immediately. Nathan, torn between concern and suspicion, stood there for a moment, then finally stepped closer. "Sir, you can't sleep here. It's too cold. You'll freeze to death." The man finally opened his eyes, clouded, tired, but startlingly lucid. He looked up at Nathan without flinching, without fear, just a quiet resignation that made Nathan's chest tighten unexpectedly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," the man said, his voice rough but steady. "I'll be gone by morning." Nathan could have turned and walked away. He could have called someone, shelter services, the police, anyone, but something in the man's eyes stopped him. There was no panic, no plea, not even shame, just a deep, tired acceptance. And underneath it, something else. Recognition? "No, that couldn't be. Do you have somewhere to go?" Nathan asked. The man didn't answer. That was answer enough. Nathan sighed. He looked up at the quiet sky, the stars blurred by frost, then back at the man. "The garage is not warm, but I can put a space heater in there. Some blankets. You can stay the night." The man blinked, as if unsure he'd heard correctly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You already are," Nathan muttered, though not harshly. "But so is my cousin when he visits. Doesn't mean I kick him out in the snow." That night, Nathan set up the small heater he used when working on his car in the winter, found an old army blanket from a camping trip years ago, and brought out a thermos of hot tea. The man, who introduced himself simply as Eli, thanked him with a nod and curled up in the makeshift corner Nathan had cleared. Back inside, Nathan stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep. Something about the man's presence gnawed at his memory, though he couldn't place why. He told himself it was probably nothing, a face that reminded him of someone from school or a neighbor he used to know. Still, the unease clung to him like a draft he couldn't seal. The next morning, Nathan woke with the intention of driving Eli to the local shelter. He expected the garage to be empty. Most people, once warm and fed, moved on. But when he stepped outside, he found Eli still there, quietly seated on the floor, sipping tea from a now-empty thermos. "You didn't leave," Nathan said, not hiding his surprise. Eli looked up. "Didn't seem right to. Not without thanking you properly." Nathan narrowed his eyes. "You slept here all night? Better than most nights I've had in years." It was hard to know what to say to that. Nathan looked around, as if expecting some cosmic cue. "Well, you can't stay here forever." "I understand," Eli replied, and began folding the blanket neatly, with almost military precision. Nathan watched, eyebrows raised. "Were you in the service?" he asked. Tried to make the question sound casual. Eli paused just briefly. "A long time ago." Nathan nodded slowly. "Me too. Army brat. Anyway, my dad served. Vietnam." Eli's hand still for a fraction of a second, then continued folding. That day, Nathan drove Eli to the shelter, but they were full. The second one had room, but only for 2 nights. The third was across town and nearly an hour's drive away. By then, snow had started to fall again and the roads were slick. Nathan found himself making another unexpected decision. "I've got a spare room," he said, half hating himself for saying it. "You can stay until Monday. Then we'll figure something out." Eli didn't respond immediately. Then he nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. I didn't tell you my name." Eli's expression didn't change. "I saw it on a piece of mail. In the garage." Nathan tried to shrug it off, but the chill that ran through him had nothing to do with the snow outside. That night, Nathan made pasta, the only dish he knew well enough to not mess up. Eli ate quietly, slowly, like someone unaccustomed to meals at a table. When Nathan asked him about his life, Eli deflected, said little, offered vague answers. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded, like a conversation that had started long ago but never quite finished. By Sunday night, Nathan had stopped checking calendar. Something about Eli's presence felt less intrusive and more familiar. But when Monday morning came and Nathan opened the garage to grab a tool, he noticed something strange. The space was cleaner than it had ever been, organized, swept. Even the tool rack had been rearranged logically. Nathan frowned. He hadn't asked Eli to do any of that. It wasn't just clean, it was meticulously structured, the kind of order you only learn in a specific kind of life. Then, as he reached for a screwdriver, something caught his eye on the shelf. A black and white photograph, curiously placed. Timeless. He picked it up, and the breath in his lungs caught instantly. 4 young men, military fatigues, standing beside a weathered Jeep in what looked like Southern California. Written in faded ink on the back, Camp Pendleton, 1974, Charlie, Eli Donovan, and Nate. Nathan stared at the last name. Nate, his father, and next to that name, Eli. The same Eli sleeping under his roof. The same Eli who said he ended up here by coincidence. Nathan's hands trembled as he put the photo down. Suddenly, nothing about this felt like chance. And in that frozen moment of discovery, the silence that had filled his home for years began to crack. Nathan couldn't bring himself to confront Eli that morning. After finding the photograph, he returned inside the house with it tucked beneath his sweater, his thoughts churning. He made breakfast, eggs and toast, more out of habit than hunger, and set a second plate at the table. When Eli emerged, freshly shaved and wearing a pair of old jeans Nathan had loaned him, the silence between them held a new weight. "Smells good," Eli said, sitting down slowly. Nathan just nodded and pushed the plate toward him. They ate in silence, broken only by the occasional clink of cutlery. Nathan watched Eli, searching for something, anything, in his manner that hinted at the past he now suspected. But Eli remained the same, calm, reserved, with a gaze that seemed to settle just beyond the present moment. If he noticed Nathan's agitation, he didn't show it. Nathan had made plans to visit his sister in Cleveland. It was a long-standing commitment, one he couldn't back out of without raising questions. And yet, the thought of leaving Eli alone gnawed at him. The photographs had hidden in a drawer, but its presence echoed in every thought. "I'll be gone for a few days," Nathan said finally, wiping his mouth with a napkin. Eli looked up. "You're going out of town?" "Cleveland. My sister. I'll be back Thursday." Nathan hesitated. "I left some food in the fridge. There's water, extra blankets. You can stay until I get back, but I need you to stay inside, all right? No guests, no wandering off." Eli gave a small, almost sad smile. "I understand. Thank you." Nathan wanted to say more. Wanted to ask him about Camp Pendleton, about the name Nate, about the way he'd known exactly where the blankets were stored in the garage. But something held him back. A sense that once he asked, there'd be no going back. He left that afternoon. The drive to Cleveland was uneventful, but Nathan's mind remained locked on the man he had left behind. At dinner, his sister noticed his distraction, but chalked it up to post-retirement restlessness. He didn't correct her. By the time he returned late Wednesday evening, the air had shifted. Snow had melted slightly, leaving behind a slush that glazed the streets in silver. Nathan parked in the driveway and carried his bags toward the house, expecting to find the same quiet he had left behind. Instead, as he stepped into the garage, he stopped cold. Everything was different. The clutter that had lived there for years. Old tools, tangled cords, cardboard boxes of forgotten items. was gone or rearranged. Not just tidied, but structured, organized by type, size, and use. Shelves had been cleaned, oil stain scrubbed, tools polished. It looked more like a workshop than a storage space. Nathan set his bags down, blinking. He walked slowly through the garage, noting each change. The broom, once tucked behind a cabinet, now hung neatly beside the garden tools. The old wooden workbench had been sanded, its surface smooth and freshly oiled. But it wasn't just the organization. It was the precision. This wasn't the work of someone merely trying to be helpful. It was deliberate, familiar. Nathan stepped to the shelf where he'd left the photograph. It was gone. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Inside the house, he found Eli sitting in the living room, reading a book from Nathan's shelf. He looked up, offered a faint smile. "You're back early." "Traffic was light," Nathan said. He hung up his coat, then walked into the kitchen. The counter was spotless, the sink empty, dishes stacked, the trash taken out. He turned, arms crossed. "You cleaned?" Eli nodded. "I had time. You didn't have to do all this." "I know." Nathan studied him. The silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy. "Where's the photograph?" he asked. Eli's hands tensed just slightly. Then he placed the book down, carefully, and looked up. "You found it," he said, not as a question. "Yes." There was a pause. Eli nodded slowly. "I thought you might." Nathan waited. No explanation came. "It was in a box in the garage," Eli said finally. "I found it while organizing. I meant to ask you about it, but what?" Eli hesitated. "I wasn't sure you want to talk about it." Nathan stepped closer. "You were in that photo, with my father." Eli's gaze dropped to the floor. "I was." The admission hung in the air, naked and unprotected. "You didn't think to mention that?" Nathan's voice sharpened. "I didn't know who you were when I arrived," Eli said quietly. "I swear, I didn't even realize, not until I saw the name on the mail. Nathan Parker. It wasn't until then that I understood where I was." "And you stayed." Eli met his eyes. "I didn't mean to stay. I just couldn't leave. Not yet." Nathan turned away, fists clenching at his sides. He felt betrayed, confused, furious, but also, somewhere deep down, curious. He wanted answers, but they weren't coming easily. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of the photograph burned into his memory. His father, young and alive in a way Nathan had never known. And Eli standing beside him. The next morning, Eli was gone. Nathan found no note, no message, just a quiet absence of someone who had never fully belonged. But something else had changed. The shelf in the garage, the one where the photograph had been, now held a new object. A folded piece of newspaper, aged and yellowed. Nathan unfolded it slowly. It was an article, dated July 1998. The headline read, "Investigation into Missing Veterans Funds Raises Questions. Local Nonprofit Under Scrutiny." The piece detailed a financial discrepancy involving a veterans nonprofit in Ohio. Funds unaccounted for. Names withheld, but one was leaked. Elijah D. Walker, accused of mishandling accounts. No formal charges, but the implication lingered. Nathan read the article twice. Then again, Eli, the man in his garage, the man in his father's photo. He had left the article behind, deliberately, as if to say, "This is who I am. This is what you need to know." But why now? And why leave? Nathan stood in the garage, the cold pressing in. He looked around the space Eli had transformed. It no longer felt like just a garage. It felt like something else. A message. A memory. He stared at the article in his hands and realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Nathan stood in the garage long after the cold began to settle into his bones. The old newspaper article trembled in his hands, not just from the chill, but from the cascade of thoughts that refused to quiet down. The garage, now unfamiliar in its order and cleanliness, felt like a different place, haunted not by ghosts, but by truths long buried. Eli was gone. The man who had spent days in his house, who had shared his meals, who had sat silently across the table with his weathered eyes and patient calm. He had walked out, but left behind a story begging to be unraveled. Nathan took the article inside, placed it gently on the kitchen table, and stared at it again. Elijah D. Walker, Veterans Nonprofit, missing funds. The words swam in front of him. The article was decades old, but something about it felt disturbingly fresh. Why had Eli left this behind and nothing else? Not a note, not an apology, just this scrap of the past that hinted at disgrace. Was it guilt, a warning, or simply a piece of a puzzle too painful to explain in person? The next morning, Nathan pulled down the old Army footlocker from the attic, the one that had belonged to his father. It hadn't been opened in years, not since the funeral. It smelled of dust and time, of oil and mothballs. Inside, he found what he expected: medals, worn photographs, a rusted Zippo lighter, letters bundled with twine. There was no organization to the contents, just the private chaos of a life lived in silence. He started with the letters. Most were addressed to Nate, his father, from various names. Some were mundane, old friends checking in, ex-soldiers reminiscing. But one set stood out. The handwriting was tight, angular, disciplined. The return address varied, but the signature was consistent. Elijah D. Walker. Nathan read the first letter aloud, his voice breaking the stillness of the room. Nate, I don't know what day it is anymore. They all bleed together. Some mornings I wake up thinking I'm back in the jungle. I hear the birds, and I swear it's the same damn jungle, just quieter. Thank you for writing. It helps more than I can say. I don't talk to anyone else. I don't want to. You're the only one who saw what I saw. Who knows? The next letter was darker. They don't believe me, Nate. About the money. About how it went missing. I never touched it. I swear on everything I've got left. They're trying to pin it on me, and I can't fight it. I don't have your kind of calm. I shake too much. I say the wrong thing. I wish I could disappear. Nathan sifted through more. Letters that spoke of therapy sessions, failed job attempts, a daughter he had lost contact with, mentions of nightmares, of drinking too much. Then, abruptly, the letter stopped. The last one was dated May 1990. There was no goodbye, no final note, just silence. Nathan leaned back in his chair. The letters spread around him. His mind raced. Eli had been there, not just in his father's past, but deep inside it, woven into the darkest corners. A friend, maybe more than a friend. Someone his father had tried to protect. Someone who had vanished from his father's life, and then, decades later, appeared in Nathan's. Coincidence? He didn't believe that anymore. That evening, he picked up the phone and called an old friend, Charlie Blanchard, a fellow teacher and amateur military historian who had once helped Nathan research his father's service record. Charlie answered on the third ring, his voice warm but curious. Nathan Parker, retired and already bored. I need a favor. You want dirt on someone? I want a connection confirmed. Name's Elijah D. Walker. Served with the Marines. I think he was stationed with my father at Camp Pendleton, around 74. Charlie didn't miss a beat. Give me a day. Nathan didn't sleep well that night. Dreams came in fragments, gunfire, muddy boots, men shouting across humid air. In the dream, Eli was always walking away, and Nathan couldn't catch up. The next morning, Charlie called back. You were right, he said. Elijah D. Walker, Marine Corps, enlisted 71, honorable discharge in 76. Served at Camp Pendleton. He was in the same unit as your dad. Looks like they were tight. There's a photograph archive from base records, same one you described. Nathan's breath caught. Do you know anything about the investigation? Charlie was quiet a moment. Only what's public. The nonprofit was called Brothers Forward, set up in the early 90s to help reintegrate vets. Funding came from state grants, donations. The money disappeared around 98. Walker was the treasurer. He claimed internal mismanagement. No formal charges, but it ended the organization. His name never recovered. Nathan hung up with more questions than answers. He returned to the photograph, now placed beside the letters. He stared at his father's face. Young, alert, standing tall beside three other men. Eli, unmistakably him, stood to his right. That evening, Nathan poured himself a drink and sat in the garage. The space Eli had cleaned, reshaped, honored. He looked around at the symmetry, the deliberate care. He thought of the letters of the last line Eli had written. I wish I could disappear. But Eli hadn't disappeared. He had returned, not to ask forgiveness, not to reclaim anything, just to be near. There was a knock at the door. Nathan's heart jumped. He opened it quickly, but it wasn't Eli. It was a teenager, skinny, freckled, wearing a bike helmet. You Nathan? The kid asked. Yes. Guy told me to bring this to you. Said it was important. The kid handed him a small, tightly wrapped package. Said to leave it with you even if you weren't home. Nathan took it, closed the door, and returned to the kitchen. The package was wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a single item, an old, worn dog tag. Eli's name was engraved, along with a serial number. Tied to it was a folded note, written in the same tight, angular hand Nathan had seen in the letters. I had nowhere else to go. I came here by instinct, not memory. But when I saw your name, I couldn't leave. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I wanted you to know the truth. Your father saved me once. Maybe more than once. I didn't get to thank him. Maybe this is as close as I'll get. Nathan held the dog tag tightly. The silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt filled with a story only beginning to be told. Nathan didn't sleep that night. The dog tag sat on the table beside him. Its chain curled like a question mark. The note was folded and refolded until the paper wore thin at the edges. The garage, the letters, the photograph. Everything had led to this object, this fragment of Eli's identity offered not as a keepsake, but as a quiet confession. Nathan couldn't tell if it was a goodbye or a plea. By morning, he was seated on the living room floor with every box from the attic spread around him. His father had kept few personal items, but Nathan hoped something, anything, would tie back to Elijah D. Walker. What he found wasn't immediate. Most of the papers were standard. Service records, tax forms, faded report card from Nathan's school years. But buried in the bottom of a file marked private, do not discard. He found what he hadn't known to look for, a separate bundle of letters, rubber banded and labeled EDW. Nathan unfastened the band with dry snap. These letters were not addressed to his father. They were from him. Unsent drafts, dozens of them, written on yellow pages, some typed, some handwritten. Most were dated between 1982 and 1990. None were mailed. He read the first aloud, his voice trembling. Eli, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know where you are anymore. I wanted to reach out, but something always stops me. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's fear. Maybe I just don't know what to say that hasn't already been said too late. The next one was shorter. They told me what happened, about the nonprofit. I don't believe it. You may be reckless, Eli, but you're not a thief. You never were. Nathan moved through them, one after the other. His father had carried the burden of their broken connections silently. The letters bore the scars of guilt, regret, and affection. There was one, dated November 1988, that Nathan read twice. I told Harold to back off. I told him to let it go. You weren't part of that mess. But he didn't listen. He never trusted you. He saw you as a threat, always did. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him. You needed a friend, and I let silence win. Nathan froze. Harold, his uncle, his father's business partner, the man who took over the family contracting firm, when Nathan refused to follow in their footsteps. Harold had always been authoritative, a natural leader with a sharp sense of self-preservation, but he had also been close to his father, inseparable after the war. At least, that's how it had seemed. He stared at the line again. He saw you as a threat. There was more in the letter. An apology, an admission that his father had sent money to help Eli, quietly through a third party, that he had been warned against it, that it had nearly cost him his standing in the local business community. Nathan laid the letters out in a neat line, his fingers brushing each one. A pattern was emerging. Eli hadn't been disgraced by accident. He had been pushed out by pressure, by politics, by people who thought protecting their name mattered more than protecting the truth. Nathan stood abruptly. He knew what he had to do. He drove across town to the Parker and Westman construction office, the company his father had co-founded and that Harold now ran alone. The building hadn't changed in decades. Brick facade, brass plaque, the smell of sawdust and floor wax. He stepped inside, nodded at the receptionist, and waited by the door until Harold emerged from his office. "Nathan," Harold said with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Look what the cat dragged in. I need to talk to you." Harold gestured toward his office. "Always got time for you." Nathan followed him in and closed the door behind him. The room was the same as it had been when he was a child. Dark wood, heavy chairs, plaques on the wall, pictures of construction sites framed like family portraits. Harold sat behind the desk like a man used to being in charge. Nathan didn't sit. "I found letters," he said, "from my father to Elijah Walker." Harold's expression didn't change, but his fingers tapped once against the desk. "He never mailed them," Nathan continued, "but he wrote them over and over. I also found an article and a dog tag. Eli left them for me." Harold leaned back. "Is he still around?" "I don't know," Nathan said. "He disappeared again. But before that, he stayed with me. He organized my garage. He cooked dinner. He fixed the heater. He talked less than anyone I've ever met, but he listened, and he didn't lie." Harold said nothing. Nathan stepped forward. "I want to know what really happened in 1998. The nonprofit, the money, the fallout." Harold sighed, folded his hands. "You're digging up old ghosts, Nathan. Your father and I decided long ago to let sleeping dogs lie." "My father didn't let it lie," Nathan snapped. "He tried to help Eli. You stopped him." There was a pause. Harold looked up, and for the first time, there was no mask of charm or authority. Just a man too tired to pretend. "We had a lot riding on those years," he said. "Contracts with the city, state partnerships. If it came out that your father's war buddy was being investigated for fraud, it could have sunk the company. I advised him to distance himself. Strongly." "You didn't just advise," Nathan said. "You pressured. You manipulated." "I protected the family business," Harold said, his voice rising. "And your father, for all his moral high ground, stayed in that business. He didn't walk away." "No," Nathan said, "but he wrote letters he never sent. That tells me he never agreed with what you did." Harold stood. "It's done. You want to go chasing ghosts, fine. But don't rewrite history to suit your emotions." Nathan stared at him a long moment. Then he turned and left without another word. Back home, he laid the letters out again, added Harold's half-confession to the growing story. Eli had been left to take the fall, not by accident, but by design. His father had tried to help, and failed, not because he didn't care, but because someone else cared more about perception than people. Later that evening, Nathan sat in the living room, the dog tag in his hand. He dialed every veteran support line in the city, asking for Elijah D. Walker. No one had seen him. Shelters hadn't registered him. Police reports showed no incidents. But one name kept resurfacing, in a letter in an old draft in one of Eli's unsent messages. The diner, a place his father and his unit used to frequent, a roadside diner just off the old highway. Eli had mentioned it once, Nathan remembered. In the kitchen, quietly. Something about the coffee. Nathan got in the car. The night was clear, and the road stretched empty before him. The diner sat at the edge of town, a metal relic with flickering neon lights and a scent of burnt grease. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The woman behind the counter looked up and paused, her eyes narrowing. "You're Nate's boy, aren't you?" she said. Nathan nodded slowly. "You knew him?" "I poured him coffee for 20 years, she said with a small smile. Then her expression sobered. "Eli was here 2 nights ago. Asked about you." Nathan felt a weight drop in his chest. "Did he say where he was going?" She shook her head. He looked tired. "Sad, but clearer. Said he finally found something he'd been looking for." Nathan sat at the counter, silent. Outside, the cold pressing again. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the next step in something unfinished. The drive back from the diner was slow, not because of traffic, there was none, but because Nathan couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Eli's silhouette appear on the horizon. He replayed the words of the waitress over and over. He finally found something he'd been looking for. What had Eli meant? Closure? Forgiveness? Or was it just a comfort proximity to the only connection he had left to the past? Nate Parker's son? Nathan arrived home just before midnight. The house was as quiet as ever. Yet now every room, every surface, seemed filled with echoes. He turned on the porch light, more out of hope than necessity, then checked the garage. Still empty. The cot Eli had used was folded against the wall, the heater unplugged, everything meticulously put away. Nathan stared at the space for a long time before closing the door and locking it behind him. The next morning, he returned to the letters. There were still fragments he hadn't pieced together, buried within the correspondence, especially those from the later years, were hints that Eli had once tried to rebuild, to find purpose after the collapse of Brothers Forward. One letter, in particular, written in shaky handwriting and signed only with the initials EDW, stood out. It was undated, but clearly written long after the scandal. I tried, Nate. After everything fell apart, I went to Florida, stayed with a cousin for a while, helped fix boats. The sea made sense in a way land never did. But I kept seeing the same thing in people's eyes when they recognized my name. Doubt. Not hatred, just doubt. That was worse. That quiet wondering if I was the man the paper said I was. There was no response to that letter, no indication that his father had read or replied. But Nathan believed he would have. His father had kept it, after all, and now Nathan had it, along with everything else. A legacy his father had carried in silence, and which had now, somehow, become Nathan's to complete. By early afternoon, Nathan decided to visit the local veteran center. If anyone had seen or heard from Eli, it would be there. The building was small but well-maintained, tucked behind a library and shaded by trees that were just beginning to shed their autumn leaves. Inside, the air smelled of old leather and coffee. A few men played cards in the corner. A woman behind the reception desk looked up with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. Nathan nodded. "I'm looking for someone. Elijah Walker. Might have come through here recently." She frowned and typed something into the computer. "Walker," she shook her head. "We haven't had anyone by that name check in or register. Do you know if he's receiving benefits?" "I'm not sure," Nathan admitted. "He's been out of the system a long time, but he served. Marines. 70s. One of the older men playing cards nearby called out, "You talking about Eli Walker?" Nathan turned quickly. "Yes." The man set his cards down and stood. He was tall, his spine slightly hunched, but his voice was firm. "I served with Eli. A long time ago. You his son?" "No," Nathan said. "My father was Nate Parker." The man's expression changed. "Well, damn. That makes you family, then." They sat together by the window, the late sun casting long shadows on the linoleum floor. The man introduced himself as Donovan Reed, one of the men from a photo. His hands were gnarled with arthritis, but his memory, Nathan quickly learned, was sharp. "After Pendleton, we all scattered," Donovan said. "Charlie stayed in California. I ended up in Pittsburgh. Eli bounced around, but he and your dad kept in touch. At least until the mess with the nonprofit. Do you believe he did it?" Nathan asked quietly. Donovan didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back and stared out the window. "No," he said at last. "I believe Eli had a temper. I believe he was stubborn. But he was honest. Too honest, maybe. The kind of man who'd call out his own if something wasn't right. That's not always a smart thing to do." Nathan nodded. "I think he tried to expose something and got shut down." "I wouldn't be surprised," Donovan said. "That nonprofit, it was growing fast. Money pouring in. Lots of eyes watching, but not a lot of accountability." He paused and added, "Eli told me once, after everything went down, that he'd uncovered an internal error in the accounting. Tried to raise the alarm, but someone made sure he took the fall instead. Did he say who? No, but he hinted it wasn't a stranger. Someone from the inside, and someone who had friends in high places. Nathan felt a chill. The pieces continued to shift. Harold's name hung heavy in his thoughts again. The connections, the partnerships, the influence, it all fit. Before leaving, Donovan handed him something. A faded copy of an old military newsletter. On the back was a handwritten note. For when the time comes to set the record straight. As Nathan walked back to his car, he realized something had changed. Eli's story wasn't just one of disgrace. It was one of betrayal, of loyalty twisted into silence, of friendship interrupted by forces far beyond control. But also, perhaps, a redemption waiting quietly on the edge of memory. Back at home, the sun was setting when Nathan heard a noise at the side gate. He froze, then stood slowly, crossing the window. It was Eli, hunched, thinner than before, his coat too light for the weather, his eyes fixed on the house. Nathan moved quickly, opened the door without hesitation. "I wasn't sure I should come back," Eli said, voice hoarse. Nathan stepped aside. "You're here now." Eli hesitated on the threshold. Then he entered. They sat in the kitchen. No food, no small talk. Just two men and the gravity of years between them. "I found your letters," Nathan said, "and my father's." Eli nodded once. "I know what happened with the nonprofit," Nathan continued, "or enough to know you weren't the one to blame." Eli's expression didn't change. "I tried to stop it. There was a system error, a double payment logged as a withdrawal. I flagged it, brought it to the board. Next thing I knew, I was the one under scrutiny." Nathan leaned forward. "Did you ever confront Harold?" "I didn't need to," Eli said. "The night before your father stopped writing to me, he called. Said Harold told him the company's future was at risk. Said he had to choose between me and everything he'd built with his brother. I told him to choose the business." Nathan's throat tightened. He regretted that. "I know," Eli said softly. "I never blamed him. I just blamed the war. The way it changed us, made silence seem like safety." They sat for a long time, the quiet stretching without discomfort. Finally, Nathan spoke. "You can stay here, Eli. For now. We've got more to talk about." Eli looked down at his hands. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Nathan said. "You're the only unfinished chapter in my father's story." Eli met his eyes. "And you're the last piece of mine." Outside, the wind began to rise, rattling the windows. Inside, for the first time in decades, the silence held something else. Understanding. Nathan sat at the kitchen table, enveloped in the soft glow of the lamp. Before him lay the faded but meticulously organized letters, the archival photograph, the dog tag, and that telling newspaper article. His mind was a whirlwind, fragments of memory and revelation weaving themselves into a knot he couldn't untangle. The room was silent, except for the hum of the old refrigerator. He stared at the article one more time. Investigation into missing veterans' funds raises questions. Local nonprofit under scrutiny. The nonprofit, Brothers Forward. The date, July 1998. He thought of Eli, of his father, of Harold. All intertwined in a story of loyalty, betrayal, and invisible wounds. Nathan felt the press of years on his shoulders and sudden need to unearth truths. He placed a call to his sister, explaining that he was delving into their father's past and would be focused for a while. She didn't press for details, sensing it was personal. The next morning, he set out with purpose. He drove to the county archives, an unassuming brick building inside a small park. The archivist greeted him kindly and led him to the newspaper microfilm section. Nathan scrolled through the months leading up to and following July 1998. He found the full article. Details about missing grant money meant for veterans' housing, internal board disagreements, and a cryptic line suggesting someone within the organization had vanished under pressure. No names were printed, but all roads pointed back to Elijah D. Walker. He took photographs of each relevant page. Leaving the archives, Nathan made a stop at his local library. He searched public records and found a record of Brothers Forward, registered in '95 with an address in downtown Columbus, suspended in '99, with no filings beyond. A red flag. Worse. His search unearthed a single Associated Press wire mention from 2002 about a defunct nonprofit whose treasurer had suddenly disappeared from the public eye. Again, no names, but it was too telling. Returning home, Nathan laid everything out: letters, articles, records. The pattern was undeniable. Eli had been not only tied to the mess, but had been ensnared by it. It wasn't negligence. It was design, a scapegoat thrown under the bus for political and financial expediency. Late afternoon brought a knock on the door. It was Donovan again, the veteran from the center. He held a manila envelope. "I found these tucked away in the center storage," Donovan said. "Old bulletins and meeting minutes from Brothers Forward. They weren't digitized, but I kept them." Together, they pored over yellowed minutes and dusty newsletters. One minute stood out, dated March 1998, barely legible. "Motion to remove Treasurer E.D. Walker from fiscal oversight effective immediately. Pending audit. Votes recorded. Unanimous, except for one abstention." No name for who abstained. Nathan's breath caught. "What does that mean?" he asked Donovan. "Someone had a conscience," Donovan said quietly. "One of the board members didn't sign off. That tells me someone stood by Eli." Nathan closed his eyes. Nate's father probably cast that vote. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, Nathan drove to the hospital where his father's old service records had been stored, or so he believed. He talked to the records clerk, who remembered him. Because nothing could be released without proof, she offered to check internal correspondence. Hours later, she told him there was a letter marked confidential between his father and an auditor, dated August 1998. Nathan visited the state records office to read it. The letter is brief. His father writing that the removal of Walker from fiscal oversight was a tragedy born of politics, not malfeasance. He offered to provide testimony on Walker's behalf. Nothing ever came of it. Harold had blocked it. Nathan leaned heavily against the table, the weight of the revelation settling in. His father had kept this secret, protective, regretful, incapable of rewriting the past. He returned home just as dusk fell. Inside, Eli had started a fire in the fireplace, a faint glow lighting the room. No words were exchanged. Nathan simply sat beside him and placed the letters and articles on the coffee table between them. Eli's eyes rested on the pile. "You found it," he said, voice low. "Everything," Nathan replied. "I know what happened." Eli's gaze dropped. "I didn't want to return until I knew how it ended. I didn't want to be unwanted." "You're not unwanted," Nathan said firmly. "You were thrown under the bus. And someone, my father, tried to stop it." Eli closed his eyes. "I knew he tried. It was the least he did that I never forgot." They stayed like that. Two men bound by war, family, betrayal, and finally by truth. Outside, the night swallowed the world. And inside, at long last, silence was not empty, but filled with reckoning and perhaps redemption. The following morning, Nathan awoke to find Eli gone again. The fire in the hearth had long since died, the embers barely warm. The blanket Eli had used was folded neatly on the edge of the couch, the same meticulous care he had shown in the garage weeks earlier. Nathan checked the guest room. Nothing. No note this time, no message, not even the sound of the screen door creaking closed. Outside, the street was quiet. The frost that had glazed the sidewalks overnight was beginning to melt under the first tentative light of morning. Nathan stood motionless on the porch, searching the neighborhood with tired eyes. A single bird chirped from a bare tree, oblivious to the churn of questions in Nathan's mind. Why had Eli left again, after everything? Nathan's first instinct was worry, not anger, not even confusion. Just a deep, sinking fear that Eli had vanished permanently this time, taken by the same current that swept him from his father's life decades earlier. He needed to act quickly while the trail was still warm. He returned inside and started making calls. The local shelters, the VA hospital, Donovan at the Veterans Center, the diner, the library. No one had seen Eli since his brief return. Each call added weight to the silence. Nathan drove to the nearest shelter first, the same one he called weeks earlier, the one that had been full when he tried to take Eli there. The woman at the desk was kind but firm. No one by that name. Not recently. He left his number anyway, along with a description, and a photo he'd printed from the old military image. The woman glanced at it and murmured, "Looks like someone I might have seen last week, but I can't say for sure." The second shelter was less helpful, overcrowded and underfunded. They barely had time to take his name. The third didn't answer phone. Nathan drove there in person. Still nothing. On the way home, he passed the old veteran's diner and turned in on impulse. The parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, the same waitress from before stood behind the counter, pouring coffee. She recognized him immediately. "Nathan, right?" she said. "Still looking." "He was here, wasn't he?" Nathan asked, "Before he came back to my place." She nodded, sat in that booth near the window. 2 nights in a row. Didn't say much. Just asked if I remembered him. She poured a mug of coffee and slid it toward him. He looked like a man trying to decide something. Nathan sat, not drinking. Did he say anything else? She thought for a moment. He asked about a man named Donovan. Said he thought he owed him an apology. I told him Donovan still came around the vet center. Nathan's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. He never made it there. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but I think he wanted to." He thanked her and left. The sun was now higher, the sky cloudless, the kind of crisp autumn day that felt too calm for everything it was holding. Back at home, Nathan reviewed the letters again, every hint, every line, every name. There was one letter from Eli's earlier years that mentioned a place in the rural outskirts of Columbus, the farm road off Miller Creek. Nathan had dismissed it before, thinking it was just a memory, but now it felt like a clue, a thread. He pulled up an old map online and searched Miller Creek. It wasn't much. A few scattered properties, some abandoned, some still active. A narrow road wound to the area, unmarked on most GPS apps. He got in his car and drove. The road was long and winding, flanked by overgrown brush and fields turning amber with the season. After nearly an hour, he came upon an old, weather-beaten sign. Miller's Dairy, C 1952. The buildings looked long since abandoned, but there was smoke rising from a metal barrel near the barn. Nathan parked cautiously and approached on foot. The closer he got, the more sure he became. Eli was there. He sat on an overturned bucket beside the barrel, warming his hands. The same coat, the same posture. He didn't look up until Nathan was a few feet away. "You found me," Eli said, not surprised. Nathan didn't speak right away. He just looked at him. This man who had disappeared so many times, but always left breadcrumbs behind. A letter, a dog tag, a name and a story. "I don't like leaving things unfinished," Nathan said finally. Eli gave a small nod. "I didn't run. I just stepped back. I needed time. You should have said something. I didn't know how. I thought I was only causing more trouble by staying." Nathan sat on a crate beside him. The cold air wrapped around them, but the fire from the barrel kept it at bay. "I don't think you understand," Nathan said. "You weren't trouble. You're part of this. My father, he didn't forget you. He didn't give up. He tried. Maybe too quietly, maybe too late, but he did." Eli's eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "I never hated him for choosing his life. I hated myself for giving him a reason to." He didn't see it that way. Eli was silent for a long time. Nathan stood and paced, too many thoughts crowding him. "You said something once, that you didn't come here because of memory, but instinct. I think you came because some part of you knew this story needed to be told, and you were the only one left who could tell it." Eli looked up. "That's not why I came." "Then why?" "Because I couldn't live with the silence anymore." Nathan stopped. "That's why I stayed in the garage that first night," Eli said, voice steady. "Why I cleaned it. Why I left a photograph where you'd find it. I wanted to be seen again. Not pitted, not forgiven. Just seen." Nathan sat back down. "I see you," he said. "Now I need the rest." Eli didn't answer right away. The fire crackled between them. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't steal anything, but I did make a mistake. I let the wrong man manage the books. Trusted him because he was a vet, because he talked big about loyalty and honor. Turned out he was laundering money, Slowly, quietly, just enough that no one would notice. I did. I brought it up at the board meeting. They acted like I betrayed them. Harold was involved? Eli nodded, indirectly. He wasn't on the board, but he had business ties with the group, donations, contracts. Your father told me Harold wanted the whole thing buried, said I was a liability, that if I talked, it'd ruin too many people. Nathan stared at him, so they shut you out. They stripped me of everything. And your father, he tried to help, but the pressure was too much. His silence protected his family. Nathan said nothing. There was nothing to say. Eli reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. Inside was a folded photograph. Another one. This time, it showed 4 men at a campfire. Different setting. Different mood. One night after Pendleton, Eli said, "The 4 of us talked about what we'd do if we ever lost touch. We said we'd find our way back, no matter what." Nathan took the photo and stared at it. His father's face younger, laughing, a bottle in his hand. Eli beside him, life before the shadows. "We can still finish it," Nathan said. "We can clear your name." "I'm not sure it matters anymore," Eli said. "It does," Nathan said firmly. "To me, it does." And Eli nodded. For the first time, Nathan saw not a broken man, but a tired one, whether by years of being misremembered, misjudged, and forgotten. But not anymore. Now, at last, someone remembered. Eli didn't return to Nathan's house that night. After their long conversation at the abandoned dairy farm, he remained there, quietly declining Nathan's offer of a warm bed and hot food. He said he needed the solitude, needed to sit a little longer with the weight of everything they'd dug up. Nathan left him there reluctantly, promising to return the next day. But when he did, the barrel was cold, the place empty, no sign of Eli except the ash scattered by the wind and the faint indent of a seated figure on the upturned bucket. Nathan didn't panic. Not this time. Something in Eli's manner the previous night had shifted. There was peace there, not full, not final, but enough to suggest that the man was finally ready to confront a world he'd spent years avoiding. 3 days passed. Nathan returned to his routines, though everything now felt different. The house was the same, the silence familiar, but charged with memory. He kept the photograph Eli had given him on his desk, looked at it often. There was something almost fragile about it, like it might dissolve if he stared too hard. He also kept a small notebook nearby, writing things down, names, dates, questions he still needed to ask, ideas of how to take the next step. He was in the middle of writing a list of organizations to contact, legal aid, veteran support groups, even local reporters, when the phone rang. It wasn't a number he recognized. The voice on the other end was quiet, feminine, and cautious. "Is this Nathan Parker?" "Yes. I hope this isn't a bad time. My name is Ray Walker. I believe you've been looking for my father." Nathan nearly dropped the phone. "Yes," he said quickly. "Yes, I have. Is Eli with you?" "He showed up yesterday," she said, completely out of the blue. I hadn't heard from him in years. Then he called from a borrowed phone, said he had something to say. Nathan closed his eyes. Relief and curiosity surged together. "Where are you?" "We're just outside Dayton," Ray said. "I wasn't sure what to expect, but he mentioned you, said you might want to know he's safe." "I do," Nathan said. "Thank you for calling. I didn't know if I'd hear from him again." There was a pause on the line. Then Ray said, "He's not the same man I remember, but he's trying. Whatever you did, whatever happened, it gave him the courage to show up again." Nathan felt his throat tighten. "That means a lot. He wants to talk to you," Ray said, "but he needs time. He's here. He's resting. He's processing." "I understand," Nathan said. "No pressure. Just tell him I'm here." "I will." They hung up. Nathan remained seated for a long while, the dial tone echoing softly in the silence before he slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. Later that evening, he received a small envelope in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of paper in Eli's handwriting. "I saw her, Nathan, after 20 years. She opened the door and didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't slam it shut. She just stood there. I said her name, and she said mine. That was enough. We talked for hours. About nothing and everything. I didn't tell her the whole story. Only that I was trying to fix something. For her and for myself. And for your father. You gave me the chance. I don't know what comes next. But for the first time in a long while, I want there to be a next. Thank you. There was no signature. Just a single sentence beneath the letter. Penned like a promise. I'll come back if you want me to. Nathan folded the letter slowly and placed it beside the photograph on his desk. He didn't need time to decide. The next morning, he drove to the diner once again and met with Donovan, showing him the letter and telling him everything. Donovan smiled and shook his head. I never thought he'd face her again. That man carried more ghosts than he let on. He started letting go, Nathan said, little by little. They sat over coffee and Nathan told him his plan. To clear Eli's name, not in court perhaps, but publicly in community spaces where it mattered. He had the records, the letters, the internal documents, testimonies from men like Donovan, and soon maybe from Ray. If the public had branded Eli as a criminal, the public could also be shown the truth. That afternoon, Nathan began building a case. He compiled timelines. He scanned every letter and filed them carefully. He outlined a short essay, part history, part memoir, that could serve as a basis for an article. He reached out to a local lawyer, recommended by one of the Veteran Center volunteers, who specialized in clearing the records of wrongfully accused service members. He made an appointment for the following week. The day after that, Eli called. His voice was steady. Different. I'm not good at making plans, he said, but I'd like to come back. I want to speak at the ceremony. Nathan didn't say anything at first, too stunned to respond. Then, you'd be welcome. I've been thinking about your father, Eli said, about the last time we spoke. I never got to say goodbye. I'd like to say something now, if that's all right. Nathan nodded, even though Eli couldn't see it. It is... They hung up, and Nathan returned to his desk. He opened a fresh page in his notebook and wrote a new heading, the ceremony. Beneath it, he listed names, dates, memories. He would plan a tribute, not just to his father, but to all four men from the photograph. Charlie, Donovan, Eli, Nate, the brotherhood that had endured, even when time and war and politics tried to erase it. He imagined the garage, transformed into a space of memory. Photographs on the wall, letters framed, the original photo in a glass case. Maybe even a plaque with all their names engraved, not for glory, but for remembrance. That night, he sat by the fire, sipping tea, staring at the embers the same way Eli had weeks earlier. And in the quiet of his home, filled now with layers of history and healing, he felt something new settle in his chest. Not closure, but direction. Eli was no longer just a fragment of his father's past. He was now a piece of Nathan's future. And this story, long buried, heavy with silence, was finally stepping into the light. Nathan had never once imagined that a stack of old letters and a black and white photograph could fracture and rebuild his understanding of his own father. Yet now, every hour that passed seemed to reveal another layer, another buried truth. It was no longer just about Eli or the nonprofit scandal. It had become about Nate Parker himself. The choices he made, the battles he fought long after the war had ended, and the family he tried to protect, even if it meant sacrificing the people who had once mattered most. In preparation for the upcoming ceremony, Nathan had started digging deeper into his father's post-war life, his business dealings, his partnerships, especially those tied to his Uncle Harold. The letters Nathan had found hinted at a financial entanglement that ran deeper than he originally assumed. And while Harold had admitted to advising his father to distance himself from Eli during the brothers' Ford scandal, Nathan could feel there was more. He began at the county records office, requesting access to Parker and Westman Construction's business filings from the early 1990s. Most of the documents were standard: license renewals, partnership agreements, tax records. But in one file, he found something that made his heart pound. It was a check dated June 1998. The amount, $10,000. The signature, Nate Parker. The recipient, an attorney in Columbus known for representing nonprofit whistleblowers. The memo line read only, "Consultation Yef." Yef. Elijah's full name, Elijah Francis Walker. Nathan stared at the page for a long moment. The implications clear. His father had paid for legal counsel on Eli's behalf during the height of the investigation. Quietly, discreetly, likely behind Harold's back. The next document was more cryptic, a handwritten note, tucked between two annual reports and signed and barely legible. It read, "If anything happens, if the board pushes harder, hold back. Harold will threaten the whole firm. He doesn't understand Eli. He thinks he's a weakness, but he's the reason I ever came back from that war with my mind intact. We all owe him more than we admit." Nathan took a copy of both and left the building with a head full of fire. This was no longer about redemption. This was vindication. Truth so long buried it had grown mold around it. His father had not betrayed Eli. He had tried to save him, even at risk to his own livelihood. And Harold, ever pragmatist, had worked against it, likely using every bit of influence he could to silence the truth and preserve the company's image. Back home, Nathan laid the new evidence on his dining table. When Eli called that night, Nathan didn't hesitate. "I found the check," he said. There was a pause. Then Eli's voice came through, soft and rough. "He never told me he did that. He didn't tell anyone, I don't think," Nathan said. "But he did it. He tried to fight for you. He just couldn't win that time." There was silence on the other end of the line, but it wasn't the silence of distance. It was something deeper, a processing of grief that had been held too long. "I always thought I was alone in it," Eli said eventually, "that I'd asked too much of friendship that had already given me everything." "You didn't ask," Nathan said. He offered. The next morning, Nathan paid Harold a visit. The office was quieter than usual. A new assistant greeted him, and Harold emerged from the back hallway, looking older than Nathan remembered, his frame slightly stooped, his voice thinner. He motioned Nathan into the office without a word. "I found the check," Nathan said as soon as they were seated. $10,000. "Dad gave it to an attorney representing Eli. You knew, didn't you?" Harold didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back and stared at a photo on the wall. A construction site, workers in hard hats, his father beside him. "I knew," Harold finally said. "I told him it was a mistake." "You told him it would destroy the company." "It might have." Nathan nodded. "But it didn't. What it destroyed was Eli's reputation. And it left my father to die with the guilt of not being able to fix it." Harold's jaw tightened. "I did what I thought was best." "No, you did what was safest," Nathan replied. "And now I'm going to do what's right." "I suppose you got it all figured out now," Harold said. "The noble son, the great Redeemer." "No," Nathan said, standing. "But I'm not going to let my father's silence be the last word." That evening, Nathan called Eli again. This time, Ray answered. She sounded lighter, warmer. "He's been reading those letters over and over," she said. "Your father's words. Yours. He's quiet, but I can tell something in him is changing." Nathan asked if Eli would be willing to speak at the ceremony, not as a man trying to explain himself, but as a voice honoring the brotherhood they all once shared. Ray was quiet for a moment, then said, "I think he would." 2 days later, Nathan received a package in the mail. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook, pages filled with memories, names, places, some hard to decipher, others clear. A note was tucked into the first page. "This is all I have left of who we were. Maybe it's time someone else knew too. You're not just your father's son, Nathan. You're the one carrying the story now. Tell it well." It was signed, "Simply Eli." Nathan held the notebook in his hands. Overcome, this was more than evidence. It was legacy, and he intended to honor it. Nathan didn't return to Harold's office again. There was nothing more to say. The weight of what it uncovered, the letter, the check, the memories Eli had entrusted him with, left little room for diplomacy. Harold's version of the past, curated through caution and silence, had finally fractured. and in its place stood the story that Nathan now knew he had to tell. He began the process carefully. First, he gathered every document into a digital archive: the check, the legal correspondence, his father's letters, Donovan's testimony. Even Ray contributed a written statement about her father's character before and after the scandal, offering context of the man she had known before he disappeared. Eli himself, though reluctant, agreed to write a brief account. It was sparse but powerful, a single page recounting the events surrounding the mismanaged nonprofit, his attempt to report the financial irregularities, and the swift, crushing silence that followed. Nathan met again with a legal advisor he'd been referred to, a quiet, methodical man named James Whitaker, who had spent much of his career dealing with historical misjudgments in military and civil records. This is more than enough to reopen public conversation, James said after reviewing the materials. But if you're looking for legal absolution, it's more complicated. There were never formal charges, no conviction. That helps. But it also means there's no official record to clear. What we're dealing with is reputation. And for that, we'll need a different kind of platform. Nathan understood. Eli had never stood trial, but his name had been tried by whispers, assumptions, and cowardice. There was no courtroom to return to, only the court of public memory. "I'm not looking for compensation or punishment," Nathan said. "I just want the truth recorded. I want his name tied to the facts, not the rumors." James nodded. "Then we start with a statement, a publication. We get it into veteran networks, nonprofit transparency journals, and local news. Once it gains traction, it'll live beyond any silence that tried to bury it." Nathan left the office with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, he drafted the article. He pored over every word with care. The tone was steady, not accusatory, but unwavering. He named the facts, cited the evidence, refused to let the convenient narratives of the past obscure what had really happened. And at the center of it all, he placed Eli, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a man who had tried to do right and had paid a price for it. He titled it, "The Man Behind the Silence, the Unspoken Redemption of Elijah D. Walker." He sent it to James, to Donovan, to Ray, and finally to Eli himself. Eli responded with a short message. "You told it better than I ever could have. Thank you." The article was published online through a mid-sized independent platform focused on military ethics and nonprofit accountability. Within days, it was shared across veteran communities, forums, and social media. Former board members of Brothers 4 remained silent, but several past employees commented in support, some even expressing regret that they hadn't spoken up sooner. Donovan reached out days later. "You've started something, Nathan," he said over the phone. "People are talking. For the first time in 20 years, Eli's name isn't being spoken like a ghost's." Nathan didn't care about recognition. He didn't care whether Harold read the article or responded. The truth wasn't meant to attack. It was meant to anchor. And now, Eli had a name that meant something again, not just in dusty records, but in real voices. But something unexpected happened a week later. Nathan received a letter, certified, sealed in legal stationery. It was from Harold. He considered not opening it, but he did. The letter was brief, unapologetic in tone, but heavy in implication. "I read the article. You've done what your father couldn't. I don't agree with all your conclusions, but I recognize that the man we cast aside didn't deserve what happened to him. If you plan to include his story in the company archives or the memorial, I will not stand in your way." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't remorse. But it was acknowledgement. And that was enough. Later that week, Nathan met with the planning committee organizing the veteran ceremony. He requested to add a segment honoring unrecognized service and sacrifice. The committee agreed. He proposed a plaque in the name of Charlie, Donovan, Eli, and Nate, the Pendleton Four, as Donovan had once jokingly called them. Approved unanimously. The garage, too, had begun its transformation. Nathan cleared one wall entirely. There, he planned to build a display, letters, photographs, even the original dog tag Eli had left behind. Not as a museum, but as a living tribute. A reminder that history isn't always what's written first, but what's remembered most truthfully. One evening, as he was sorting through another box of his father's effects, Nathan found something he hadn't noticed before. Tucked between 2 pages of an old field manual was a smaller envelope, sealed and addressed simply to Walker. He opened it. Inside was a short note, scrawled in his father's unmistakable handwriting. "Eli, if you ever read this, know I tried. I wish I'd tried harder. You didn't deserve what happened. I hope one day you'll find your way back to the place where your name means something again. And if you can't, I hope someone else will carry it for you. With respect, always, Nate." Nathan read it twice, then placed it carefully in the notebook Eli had sent him. That night, he called Eli. "I found something else," he said. "Another letter from him." Eli didn't respond right away. Then, with a voice like wind over broken stone, he said, "I never stopped hoping he'd write one more time." "He did," Nathan said, "and I think he hoped I'd find it too." Eli was quiet. Then, "Will you read it at the ceremony?" "I'd be honored." The line went silent again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning. The days leading up to the ceremony were filled with a nervous energy that Nathan hadn't felt since the early years of teaching, when each new semester carried the weight of unknown students and untold stories. But this was different. This time, the weight came not from anticipation, but responsibility. He wasn't preparing a syllabus. He was preparing to publicly restore man's name, to tie the broken threads of a decades-old bond, to finish what his father never had the chance or the freedom to complete. He worked tirelessly. The garage had transformed into something else entirely, a space of memory, reflection, and reverence. On one wall hung the now famous photo of the Pendleton Four: Charlie, Eli, Donovan, and Nate. Beneath it was a small table displaying the leather-bound notebook Eli had sent, the letters, a framed scan of the check Nate had written for the lawyer, and the final note Nathan had discovered hidden in the field manual. It wasn't a museum. It was a story, told in silence, paper, ink, and the steady weight of time. A local reporter, moved by the article James had helped circulate, asked to cover the event. Nathan agreed on one condition: that the focus remain on the veterans and their bond, not the scandal. He wanted to honor their service, their friendship, and the legacy his father had left behind, not sensationalize it. He mailed invitations to all surviving members of the old unit, whose addresses he could find. Charlie, now living in San Diego, sent a handwritten note in return, thanking Nathan for bringing dignity back to a man who never deserved to lose it. Donovan, of course, had helped plan the entire thing, and would be speaking as well. Ray confirmed she would attend alongside Eli. The day before the event, Nathan stood before the mirror, adjusting his collar, rehearsing his words. The speech was short, no more than 6 minutes, but it held years of untold emotion. It was less a eulogy, more a bridge between generations, a promise that silence wouldn't be the last chapter, that truth would be spoken aloud. That night, as he was preparing the printed programs and placing final touches in the garage, his phone rang. He expected it to be Donovan or Ray with a logistics question. It was neither. It was the hospital. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "Mr. Parker, we're calling on behalf of Ray Walker. Her father, Elijah, was brought in this evening." Nathan felt a cold ripple run through him. "What happened?" he asked. "He collapsed outside their home." Paramedics responded quickly. His vitals were unstable, but he's stable now. "Is he awake?" "No, sir. He's resting." Nathan's chest tightened. "Will he be able to attend the ceremony tomorrow?" There was a pause. "I'm afraid it's too soon to say. He's conscious but weak. If there's any significant change overnight, Ray will call." Nathan thanked them and hung up. He sat in the garage, alone, surrounded by the pieces of story Eli had lived but never told aloud. And now, just as the world was ready to listen, Eli's presence was uncertain. Nathan wrestled with what to do. Part of him wanted to postpone the event, wait until Eli recovered. But another part, deeper and more insistent, told him that the ceremony wasn't just about one man. It was about all of them, the lives they led, the friendships they held on to, the burdens they carried, and above all, the truth they were denied. He called Ray. She answered quickly. "I heard," Nathan said. How is he? Resting, she said, stubborn, still trying to get out of bed, even though the nurse told him he'd pass out again. Nathan smiled despite the ache in his chest. He told me earlier today, Ray continued, that if anything happened, if he didn't make it, he wanted you to read his words at the ceremony. He wrote something. It's in the notebook. Nathan opened the leather-bound book again. He hadn't turned the last few pages. With careful fingers, he flipped to the end. There, in Eli's hand, was a letter. It was addressed to no one, but it was meant for everyone. I don't know how to measure a life. I only know what I carried. I carried guilt. I carried silence. I carried the names of my brothers. I carried the hope that someone would remember us not for the wars we fought, but for the peace we never stopped searching for. I lost years. I lost trust. I lost a daughter, and only just found her again. But I never lost what Nate gave me. He gave me space to speak. Even when he couldn't speak up for me, I never doubted he tried. I never doubted his heart. To those who stood by me, thank you. To those who turned away, I forgive you. And to those who came after, don't let silence win. Don't let fear rewrite the truth. I am Elijah D. Walker, Marine, friend, father, not perfect, but not forgotten. Nathan closed the book and breathed deeply. He had his answer. The ceremony would go on. He called Donovan, then the event coordinator, then the reporter. Eli might not be able to attend, he told them, but he'll still be heard. The next morning arrived with pale gray skies and a cool breeze. Friends, family, and strangers gathered in Nathan's backyard. The garage doors were open, the display inside softly lit by mounted lamps. Folded chairs faced the space like pews in a chapel. The reporter sat up quietly in the back. Donovan arrived early, his cane clicking softly across the concrete. Ray arrived alone. Nathan greeted her with a hug. He wanted to come, she said, but his body won't allow it. His spirit, though, it's already here. Nathan nodded, eyes wet. He stepped up to the small podium they'd arranged near the garage. As he looked at the faces before him, he felt a strange calm settle over him. The moment had come. Thank you all for being here, he began. We gathered today not to rewrite history, but to finally tell a whole, to remember 4 men whose bond outlasted war, time, and silence. He spoke of Charlie, of Donovan, of Nate, of Eli. He read excerpts from their letters, shared memories from Donovan. Then he opened the notebook and read Eli's final words. There were no grand cheers when he finished, only stillness. And in that stillness, reverence. Later, as people walked through the garage, reading, absorbing, Nathan stood beside Ray and Donovan. The 3 of them watched in silence, bonded by grief, gratitude, and something unspoken but understood. Before Ray left, she handed Nathan a small envelope. He made me promise, she said. Nathan opened it later that night. Inside was a photo, taken years ago, of Eli holding a baby. Ray, written on the back, were 4 words, always coming home. Eventually, Nathan placed a photo in the display. The hardest decisions, he thought, are not the ones we make in a moment, but the ones we choose to live with afterward. And in that, at least, he knew his father would be proud. In the stillness that followed the ceremony, Nathan found himself navigating a new kind of silence, one no longer marked by absence, but by reflection. The event had not just honored the past. It cracked something open in the present. Neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years came forward to express how deeply they had been moved. Veterans from across the county sent messages of thanks. Some even asking how they could help contribute to Memorial Nathan was slowly building in the garage. But more than anything else, it was a quiet weight of Eli's absence. His presence felt through his words, not his voice. That lingered most. Nathan hadn't expected to hear from Eli again, at least not soon. He understood the toll the past few weeks had taken. Even before the health scare, Eli had been walking a tightrope between memory and redemption, a man slowly reassembling himself after decades in the dark. Ray had promised to keep in touch, and Nathan had no doubt she would. But that didn't stop him from checking the porch every morning, hoping for a sign. 3 days after the ceremony, the sign came. It wasn't a knock, nor a phone call, nor a sudden reappearance. It was an envelope, plain, white, no return address, just his name, handwritten in Eli's unmistakable lettering. Nathan opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, folded once precise. He sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the paper. Nathan, I've never been good at goodbyes. Maybe because I've had to say too many of them in my life. Some were forced, others chosen. Some never happened at all. But this one I wanted to get right. You gave me something I never thought I'd find again. Not forgiveness, because I stopped expecting that a long time ago. Not peace, either. Peace is earned, and I'm still working toward it. What you gave me was visibility. You looked at me and saw more than what I'd done, more than the rumors, more than the man who disappeared. You saw someone worth remembering. That night in your garage, when I first realized who you were, I almost left. I thought it would be easier, cleaner, but something kept me there. Maybe it was your father. Maybe it was the cold. Or maybe it was a hope that someone, somewhere, might finally ask me to stay. You did. When Ray opened her door and let me in, I was ready to apologize for 100 things. For missing her childhood. For leaving without explanation. For becoming the man the world whispered about. But she didn't need apologies. She needed presence. And you made that moment possible. For the first time in more than 2 decades, I held her hand and didn't flinch. I'm going to Seattle. She found a program there, veterans reintegration, housing, therapy, part-time work. I never would have said yes before. But now, after all this, I realize it's not too late to live the life I walked away from, not to reclaim the past, but to give what I can with what time I have left. Thank you for telling the truth, for being brave enough to name it, for standing in the place your father once stood, and choosing to speak where he couldn't. You built something here, not just in your garage, but in the air, in the memory, in the stillness between every spoken word. Hold on to it. Share it. Let people walk through and remember. And if there's still a place for me there someday, I'd be honored to return. Until then, I'm where I need to be. Not hiding, not running, just walking forward. Yours, Eli. Nathan read it once. Then again, he folded the letter carefully and walked to the garage. The air inside was cool and quiet. The display stood untouched, exactly as it had been during the ceremony. He slid the new letter into the glass case beside the others, under the heading he created for Eli's section, What Remains. Then he stepped back and looked at the space. It no longer felt like just a garage. It hadn't for some time. It was a map of memory, a reckoning, a living archive. He turned to leave, but noticed something on the workbench, a photograph. It hadn't been there before. He walked closer, heart rising. It was a print of an image taken during the ceremony. Someone must have developed it quickly. In it, Nathan stood at the podium, holding the original Pendleton photo in his hands, sunlight falling on his shoulders. Taped to the back was a yellow post-it note, the handwriting unmistakable. You did good, kid. He'd be proud. Nathan smiled. He placed a new photo beside the others, adjusting its position until it aligned perfectly. Then he turned out the light and closed the door behind him. That night, he sat by the fire, holding a cup of tea, watching the flames curl and flicker. His house, once defined by its stillness, now pulsed with a quiet purpose. He no longer waited for footsteps on the porch or letters in the mailbox. Eli had found his way, and Nathan, at last, had found what he hadn't known he was looking for, the full truth of who his father was, and who he could now become. Weeks passed, and autumn gave way to the gray stillness of early winter. The trees shed the last of their leaves. The wind turned sharp and constant, and Nathan's days took on a rhythm that no longer felt like retirement, but responsibility. He awoke each morning with purpose, not the kind dictated by a lesson plan or a calendar, but by a deeper obligation to memory and meaning. News of the ceremony continued to ripple outward. The article had gone further than expected. National veterans groups reached out to Nathan asking for permission to repost it on their platforms. A retired colonel from California sent him a letter thanking him for giving voice to one of our own who was nearly erased by bureaucracy and fear. The letter included a photograph of the Pendleton Unit's headquarters, along with a donation to help preserve the garage display. Nathan declined the money but thanked him personally. The garage, he explained, was never intended to be a public museum. It remained what it had always been, a place where history was kept alive not by grandeur, but by intimacy. But the attention did bring unexpected opportunities. The local high school invited Nathan to speak to their senior class, students just a year or two away from adulthood, most of them unaware of the quiet wars fought within their own communities. Nathan hesitated at first. It had been nearly a year since he'd stood in front of a classroom, and the weight of what he wanted to convey didn't quite fit into a lesson plan. Still, he agreed. On the day of the talk, he arrived with a small box. Inside were the copies of the letters, the original photograph of the Pendleton Four, and a laminated version of Eli's final letter. He didn't prepare a speech. Instead, he told them the story, start to finish. He spoke not of war, but of loyalty, not of scandal, but of how easy it is to let silence consume truth, and how rare and powerful it is to speak, even when no one asks you to. The students listened, some more attentively than others, but few lingered afterward, asking questions, looking again at the photo. One girl asked if she could write her senior project on Elijah Walker's story. Nathan gave her a copy of the article and told her to ask hard questions, even the ones people might not like. Later that week, Nathan received a phone call from Ray. Her voice was lighter now, more at ease. He's doing well, she said. Tired, but different. Like he's finally breathing for the first time. How Seattle? Rainy, but he's adjusting. He walks more, talks more. He's even started therapy. The group he's with is real, no politics. Just people trying to find their footing again. Nathan felt something inside him settle. He wanted me to tell you, Ray continued, that if you ever need help with the project, he's only a letter away. I may take him up on that, Nathan said. There's more coming. Because there was. Over the following months, Nathan began organizing a community project in honor of the Pendleton Four. It wasn't about the military. It was about connection, memory, and healing. He partnered with a local library to host a monthly story circle where veterans, their families, and civilians could come and share pieces of their lives. Not speeches, just stories. He called it the Legacy Table. At the center of each gathering was a replica of the garage display, adapted for transport. People brought their own items, letters, medals, journals. One man brought a pair of boots that had belonged to his brother. A woman brought the last postcard her father had sent from Korea. Each object, like Eli's dog tag or Nate's photograph, carried something bigger than itself. Nathan didn't lead the conversations. He simply opened the door, lit the space, and made coffee. Sometimes that was enough. By spring, the project had taken on a life of its own. Donations came in not of money, but of memories. People wrote in mailed photos, shared names and dates. Nathan cataloged everything with quiet diligence, building an archive of community history that had no official place, except here. In a garage? It was no longer just a garage. It became known in the neighborhood as the Room of Stories. Visitors came by appointment, though Nathan never turned anyone away. Local college students volunteered to help maintain the space. A small wooden bench was placed outside, with a plaque that simply read, "Sometimes the door we open isn't to a room, but to a reckoning." One warm Saturday morning, as Nathan was sweeping the front steps, a delivery van pulled up. The driver handed him a small package. It had no return address, but Nathan recognized the handwriting immediately. Inside was a single photograph, a recent one. Eli, standing on a Seattle pier, beside Ray. They were smiling, not posing, just captured in a quiet moment of ease. Eli looked older, of course, but stronger. Oh, taped to the back was a note. Nathan, it's not about finishing the story. It's about finally being part of it again. I hope to see you soon. Eli. Nathan placed a photograph in the final frame of the display, just beneath the original black and white image from Camp Pendleton. The young men who had once stood beside a military jeep now watched over a future they never could have predicted. That night, Nathan sat in the garage, alone. The lights were dim. The air carried the first breath of spring. He thought of his father, of Eli, of the boy he had once been, and the man he had become. He reached into the drawer, pulled out the final letter his father had written, the one he had never mailed, and read it again aloud, not because he needed to hear it, but because the silence, at last, had somewhere to go. As the words settled into the room, Nathan closed his eyes. He didn't need to wait for another letter or another call. The story had found its way home, and now it would never be lost again.